Paul, thank you for being with us today. It's an honor. You are one of the most influential leaders of your generation when it comes to change management. For D&I and sustainability, you transformed the companies that you led, but also you impacted the whole industry. We have distinguished leaders from CPG and retail sector among us today in the audience. Therefore, I would like to start by asking you, why do you think you were so successful from your own perspective? Why did people follow you?
Well, first of all, merhaba, and thank you, Neslihan, for this opportunity. And we had a chance to talk briefly before the taping of this call, and I have to say I'm thoroughly impressed with what you have built with LEAD, and obviously the chairperson job that you're doing. Leading executives, advancing diversity is an absolute priority and must, and it's great to see from the discussions when it started to now have over 100 companies in Turkey, 20,000 globally, 15 chapters globally. I mean, you can be truly proud. And working on partnerships, working on education, working on joint networking, all the things that we know that is important, because the challenges are so big that nobody can do it alone. And then you have this wonderful conference, hand in hand for 50-50. I think it's really time. So calling not only for progress, but calling really for a 50-50 gender representation at all levels in an organization is a must. In Unilever, as you know, it took us 10 years to get there. It was 38% when I joined the company in 2008, and it was 50% across the organization in 2019 when I left. So it is by all means possible. Don't have to do it in one day, but what people want to see is this progress. Now, there is an enormous need, because if you look at the World Economic Forum, which publishes every year what is called the Gender Parity Index, and it takes looks at statistics like economic participation, educational attainment, health and survival, political empowerment. And you see that on the current trajectory, it will take about 131 years to get this parity. And that is totally, totally unacceptable. Now, Turkey has done a lot of things as firsts, just like you created LEAD. In 1934, Turkey was the first country that actually empowered women in Europe to give them the right to vote and actually to run for elected office. Then in 2012, Turkey was again the first to ratify and to actually sign an agreement which was called the Council of Europe Convention on preventing and combating violence against women. And then obviously, despite having the lead in many of these areas, you have not seen the progress that we were all hoping for. Only 34% of the Turkish workforce is women. It's one of the lowest in the world. And on the company side, it's not much better either, because we need the companies to set the example for these economies to change. Only 20% in company management positions, 18% in boards, 11% in executive positions. And then a big discrepancy in how much we pay women for the same work as men. So there is work to do, and I can only stress to everybody that it is absolutely important that we all now, once and for all, rally together as 100 companies, but as the broader companies we influence in our value chains, to change this once and for all. Besides the morality of the issue, which I don't have to explain to you, we could all be born as a woman versus a man. The world will not function if we don't have dignity and respect, equity and compassion for everybody, if we don't give everybody the opportunity to rise to the challenge. But it is also the case for companies. If you really want to perform as a company long term and want to be competitive in an ever-changing world, you have to set yourself up for success. Playing tennis with only one hand behind your back, or hiring talent from only half of the world's pool that is available, is not a good thing. The morality is clear, but there are also strong, very strong economic reasons. 75% of all the discretionary spent in this world is actually spent by women. And if we could overcome the gender gap, it probably is the biggest contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals, which I fortunately helped develop, but could give us a benefit of over $12 trillion globally, and certainly a big share of that in Turkey as well. And the business case is strong. That's why I always have a surprise why it's so difficult for business leaders. It's not for lack of people going to university. In Turkey, as many women are now in universities as men. But you know, what we see over and over again is that companies that are in the top quartile of gender balance have 20% more likely to have above average performance. What we see is that companies that have more balanced boards, 30% or more, have over 20% more likely outperformance. So obviously it creates an inclusive culture that is better equipped to meet the financial targets, to be more likely high performing, to undoubtedly be more innovative. And all of this will translate itself in significantly better business results. I always feel a little bit embarrassed, if I may be honest, to have to defend that and explain that to people because it's so obvious. And we saw the same in Unilever. As these numbers went up, we saw our brands becoming stronger, our programs becoming stronger, our creativity becoming bigger, our innovations becoming better. And that gave Unilever a 290% shareholder return over 10 years. Now, what I like is that companies that are more diverse are also better positioned on sustainability. We looked at about 12,000 companies with one of my foundations and found that ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors are better. Just like countries that have more women in politics are more likely to be peaceful countries, also businesses that have more women in senior management are more likely to have responsible business models that we need for the world that we aspire to. So let's come to leadership, which is part of your question. What type of leadership is needed? So what are leaders that are being followed? What are leaders that will succeed, in my opinion? Firstly, they have a very strong sense of purpose, as I mentioned. Mark Twain said the two most important moments in life is the moment you're born and the moment you find out why you're born. Everybody wants to tap into something bigger than themselves. Everybody wants to have that opportunity to fully develop themselves. The second one that I mentioned is you need to lead with empathy. If you don't lead with compassion, humanity, humility, I don't think you get there. People want to work with people that care about the complex and persistent problems in the world that need to be attacked, that empathize with other humans, that want to be sure that everybody has a chance to thrive. The third one is a little bit of courage. These are difficult times. Many of the CEOs stay silent, or when they see the politicians talking one way or another, they change their mind. I think leaders that create followers are leaders that have backbones. Courage comes from the word core in Latin, that is the word heart. In Turkish it's cesaret, that is really courage. And courage actually is speaking one's mind by telling one's heart. So it's leading from the heart, not just from the mind. The fourth one is the ability not only to inspire others by walking the talk, by showing moral leadership, by constantly demonstrating the values on which your companies are built, but more importantly also by unlocking energy in others. Just giving your energy to others might help a little bit, but what really counts is unlocking the energy in everybody. How would you like to be in an organization where you don't see any chance to get to the C-suite or any chance to make serious decisions or be involved in serious decisions because of gender or sexual orientation or or racial? It's just impossible for me to comprehend that. And the last skill that we talk about, fifth, last but not least, is the ability to work in broader partnerships. The humility to say, I can't do it alone. The challenges are too big. We need to go to ultimate leadership, which is collectively fighting for things, collective leadership versus competitive leadership, especially the things that concern the future of humanity. And I would say this is one of the most important ones. So if you run your company, you have to transform your leadership yourself. It starts with yourself. So set ambitious, time-bound targets. Own the agenda yourself. I would argue don't delegate it. Not to public relations, not to communications, not to human resources either. You need to own the agenda as CEOs of this company. Then you need to create a culture of inclusivity. Many things you can do to create opportunities for development, for training, for safety and well-being of all of your employees. And then you need to rethink your talent pipeline. At Unilever, we made very clear commitments that we would hire 55% women at entry because we knew we had a little bit higher attrition. We also made very big commitments on mid-career recruiting. 60% had to be women there as well. But we embedded it in everything we did, in the recruitment process, in the succession planning progress, in the mentorship, in the sponsorships, and the list goes on. I think what was unique about Unilever was that I always felt, in line with Net Positive, have to take responsibility of your total impact, that our diversity efforts were as important to do in our value chain as they were in our own company. I did not see that separate. And I think it would not be genuine if it would be separate. So we said we need to create 5 million jobs for women farmers. We need to be sure that every training we did for farmers had 50% women in there, that the supervisors in our tea plantations, at least 50% were women. That when we worked with retailers, we especially focused on the small women entrepreneurs and keep their shops alive. So this is a thing that needs to run through all of your DNA. And then I come at the last part in terms of advocacy we talked about. You as a company and the 100 companies there are big companies, responsible companies. You really can move the needle individually and collectively. So we created what was called unstereotype in Unilever to get the whole industry to change their advertising. I often look at advertising also in Turkey, but much of that doesn't reflect yet the true spirit of gender equality. How can you change that? You help governments put regulations in place that give the same opportunities. Only 6 countries in the world right now, and it's not even my own country, the Netherlands, have gender equality written in their laws. It's actually a lot to do still. So this is that aspect of positive advocacy. So in the end, it's about trust, it's about compassion, it's about hope, and it's about putting yourself ultimately to the service of others. And those are the leaders that succeed, and those are the leaders that create the following.
Thank you. I mean, it's always inspiring to listen to you. So I didn't even interfere, especially the parts you mentioned about finding the courage, which we saw it in you. And secondly, how you walk the talk yourself. I think that was also very important. And last but not the least, of course, lead itself with the theme 50-50 and hand in hand is the collaborative action. That's why we are here for today. So very valuable
Absolutely.
Messages. Thank you.
No,
But
it needs that commitment because we had 190 countries in Unilever where we did business, and I visited more than half of them, in fact, much more than that. But in every country, I would start with safety. I have to say that to me was the most important thing of respect for human beings. What's our safety record? No compromise. But then my second discussion, before even looking at the business, I would ask about diversity. And I can tell you over and over again that the CEOs that were serious in the countries that were building diversity in all its aspects, including people with disabilities, including racial, including in all its aspects, were businesses that were more successful. There is no question about that.
I also witnessed, I must say, during this change management journey you were leading, you created male allies. Because most of the decision makers, including the CEOs, were male back then anyhow. And why were they so important, and why are still they are so important? And how did you manage to do that?
Well, when I came to Unilever, I had my first, I didn't have any request, frankly. I came from the outside, as you know, the first CEO that ran the company from the outside. But my only request was to change the external board. We had 6 white men from the Netherlands and 6 white men from the UK. And people were trying to tell me that's a very diverse board. And I said, if I become CEO, I want a diverse board. So we were the first board in the UK with 50% women. We had 3 Afro-American women. We had 2 Chinese women. We had people from all parts of the world. And we had a truly diverse board. But then my management team, as you could imagine, was also fairly male-dominated. We had about 5 out of the top 100 were female. And often you find in HR or in legal, and the rest was male. So I set out, as you well know, with an enormous ambition to have 50% of the senior management, because I also knew that if 50% of the senior management would be female, I would have a higher chance to permeate that quicker into the organization as well, which proved to be the case. So one of the first things I did was I met Kristen Engvik, who is a wonderful lady from the Nordics, who has started an organization called WIN, Women International Network it stands for, and I took about 80 of my male colleagues to that network. You started working on LEAD in Turkey, and we exposed many of our people to that. I took the board of UN Women, and that was a big signal how seriously I thought about that situation. So creating male allies, especially when a company is not yet at its targets, is even more important than any other thing you can do. Because the first thing you have to do is when you want to change the representation throughout your company, you have to influence that. And the only ones that influence are the males. So you have to convince the males. The power dynamics in companies are enormous. So the majority of leadership has to change its mindset, and they have to start role modeling. So that's why it's important. Obviously, there are many rules, laws, and regulations in companies, some written, some not written. So you have to break down barriers. These barriers, conscious and unconscious biasness, if you want to, has to be broken by the male community, because you don't have the senior women yet. So they need to become mentors. They need to believe in sponsorship. So these things are important. So addressing the changes we needed to make with policies, with procedures, with setting targets that people would buy into was frankly, unfortunately at that time, pretty much a male exercise. And that's why it's very important to, from the beginning, have the key leaders in the company that are going to drive these efforts be sponsored by women. I myself was reverse mentored, as you well know, and I made sure that my whole management team was reverse managed by a female in the organization. Creating safe space, having places in the company where the real discussions can be had, but above all, making the people responsible that are actually affected.
You were also a mentor and a sponsor for me during these policies time, let's say, they are being launched and written. It was also true for Turkey. And I was one of the first ones to write it together to help HR. And I wouldn't have thought I would be using it as the second person in Turkey for a sabbatical, which was, I would say, the main factor that I'm here today, still in business, still in NGOs, doing this lovely chat with you. The whole thing, the total progress at the very end comes and affects an individual's life, as it was in my case and my son's case. So it is very, very important. And thank you for doing that. Thank you for this pioneership, I must say, and being a role model for many leaders back then and now. So my last question, with all this experience you have, let's talk about the unconscious bias. You mentioned it several times previously. So what is the most important one or recurring one you have observed during your journey?
Yeah, I understand. That's a good question. But, you know, I thought about it when you were posing it. And I think if today the word unconscious biasness should not be used anymore, because it's so obvious. We have so many data. We can show that it drives companies into so much of a better direction that I'm still wondering if it's unconscious. I think
any longer.
if you see objections in the company where it's often not visible, it's in behavior, it's in words that are being taught with some people, it's in little things that are often not noticeable that get in the way, and that's why it's so difficult to attack unconscious biasness. The one thing, by the way, I should have mentioned before, which I insisted on in Unilever, was an incredibly rigorous performance process. Everybody in Unilever got performance reviews at the same standards, with the same transparency. So the argument that we were promoting women to make some numbers, or women don't deserve it, but they got the job because they are women, you have to be sure that you take that 100% away by having a high integrity in your performance. And that also helps us to deal with some people that express still some symptoms of unconscious, or may I say conscious biasness. Where does conscious biasness show up most? In recruiting processes. So we made sure that a lot of our recruiting processes, we got 2 million people applying to us every year, that we had some